Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Tio Champon. I think there's a question here on Zoom. I was going to add it to a question here, but that's a brilliant one from Edmond. I would stick to his. Because of your advocacy for LPG, it's something I would really come to you at the end of the show, particularly for your concluding remarks and ways to deal with it. But he already threw in that question already, the fact that the dilemma with LPG is that it is also increasingly being used by the transport sector, which might be the motivation for the government treating it the same as petrol or diesel. Is there a way to disentangle or to protect households use and, in that manner? I guess the question is clear. We've seen a rising use of LPG by most commercial drivers. And so how do you think government could go about it if your recommendation would be taken on board to at least stabilize prices for LPG gas?
Was that for me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I've seen some drivers. I remember taking a taxi a couple of years ago, and the person actually going to fill their taxi or the tank with LPG. So what that told me was that the drivers are
all right. I think that we would. Right. I don't know if you would want to, while we wait for Dr. Tio Champon to come back, but you also.
Okay. Well, disentangling it is going to be difficult because the fact that is used. I mean, how if I was the one selling it, how am I going to tell? Am I going to charge the driver a different price from someone who comes to buy it for cooking or not? I mean, the issue is a tax element on it. And so we need to clearly try to, if there's a way to separate that, I cannot fully comment on that immediately. But what I do know is that the extent to which people respond depends on its value, the value that they get from it. You see, so and the way the commercial drivers will respond will be different from those that use it in their households. But the challenge with our tax system has to do with the level at which it kind of shoves in the poor people into the mix, creating a situation where the poor people end up carrying a higher burden, a higher tax burden than those who are at the top. If you create a tax system that is fair enough, right, you can be able to solve a problem like this. So someone who is using it for household, their tax component will never be the same as someone who is using it for commercial purposes. And in that way, you can create some sense of equity that does not make one other person feel worse at the expense of the other. So that is one solution. But since Dr. Champon is here, maybe he can continue.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tio Champon.
Yeah, my apologies. I don't know what happened. My phone seemed to have restarted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think yes, Rex spoke to the issue, but the point is that you can actually price discriminate between the commercial or the transport users of LPG and households. What I have seen, and I could be wrong, is that for the households, people actually take the cylinder and they take it, to fill it up. So you can actually see that it's going to be used for the household. And then for those in the transport, like the taxis, they have to drive their taxi to the place to actually fill the tank. So that offers you a pathway or an opportunity to price discriminate. If the idea is that if you're using it for transport, then you have to pay, a much higher price based on a slightly higher tax component than for households.
Interesting. I also don't know how it works, but I was just imagining if it's possible to dismantle this cylinder, then bets your guess is as right as mine that then drivers will park somewhere, dismantle the cylinder, go fill it as if it's for household purposes. And yeah, but it's a conversation that we might also come back to it in future. But so moving on, let's look at some of the impacts. This is something both of you already started talking about. The impact of these rising fuel prices on the average Ghanaian, the bread and butter issues. And I will start with you again, Rex. How does it actually impact on the economy? So we are looking at it two ways, on government revenue, but also on individual consumers in Ghana. What's the impact of these rising fuel prices?
Well, I mean, at the microeconomic level, the way we like to describe it is that for individuals and households, you find in effect that there's a decrease in the real value of their incomes. And what that means is that the amount that they would have spent to obtain a certain basket of goods for which they would use for their upkeep and welfare, that amount itself would have reduced. And this also in itself, contributes to inflationary pressures that are experienced down the line. But since we are talking about the households, in effect, the key issue is whatever money it is you had, whatever money it is you earn at the end of the month cannot afford you the same basket of goods you probably would have used or enjoyed the month before. I mean, I have a very small car, very moderate car. But since some of these increments have come up, my fuel expenditure has gone up by another 50%. And what that means for me is that I need to do some readjustments. But I am just like one in a million, out of other people who probably use bigger cars in an urban area. And they would also need to do some sort of readjustments with their incomes and expenditure. And yeah, I mean, it generally puts pressure on the household and well-being. Now, the other part of it is that we as we have seen recently, I think that there's still going to be a series of strike actions that are going to be that are going to come forth. The reason is that when there's almost always this interplay or this relationship that goes on between inflation and unemployment, which economists like to refer to as a Phillips curve type of approach. But practically what that means is that, look, if you're going to do anything that affects incomes, the real incomes of people, that's going to affect the prices. You're either going to end up with, an increase in unemployment or a lot of agitated people who are employed. Okay, so in the end, you see that it brings up a series of strike actions by organized labor who are saying that their take-home pay cannot take them home. That is the essential message, whether they are nurses or doctors. I'm a lecturer, and UTAG has just recently come back from strike, and even that is conditional on certain things. In January, those issues may come up, but then the point is, these industrial actions are sparked by, bread and butter issues that result from, changes in a commodity like this, which is essential for households.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chio Champ, on the impacts, and maybe just wanted to ask Rex this, but I'll ask and I have your take on it. Do you also find that there's usually a case of sellers seeking profit? I mean, perhaps because of our large informal sector, there's always quick upsurge in prices of goods and services. And as you talk about the impacts of these rising prices, I want you to tackle that. Do we also find a case that immediately sellers would want to seek profit out of that?
I mean, there would always be a short-term adjustment to any price hikes. And you see that even with things like the GPRTU first, right? Where the drivers will be saying, if government increases it, then tomorrow we are also going to increase the total fare from maybe Circle to Kanishi or Circle to Doko, right? So that tends to happen. And then, of course, then what happens at the grassroots is that the person who is maybe roasting or selling beans next door would be taking that tractor to go and buy the beans from Agbublushi. So indirectly, her cost of transportation goes up, and she has to pass that cost on to you, the consumer. And that's how the cycle tends to work. So you tend to have an immediate sort of cost pass through through various things. You pay more, and how we measure that as economists, of course, would be with, like, the inflation. And then you also see the social pressures, right, as well, where organized labor and everybody's up in arms. And Rex brilliantly said the take-home pay is not taking them home. So government has to do something about it. And if you're not, if the rate of inflation is not commensurate to the rate of adjustment in their real wages, then there's problem, right? There's going to be pressure, and people will be up on the streets protesting and saying that maybe the government is quote unquote insensitive to their plight and their needs. So those are some of the ways and means that you tend to have those effects manifest at the micro level, but also sort of at the macro level in terms of inflation and unemployment. And even, you can see on the fiscal policy side, a commensurate then effect also even on like the monetary policy dimension, where the central bank may have to quickly adjust the policy rate to curtail some of these inflationary pressures.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tio Champon. There's a question here on Facebook from Solomon Kwesi Atta. He says, even though Ghana has about 17% stake in its petroleum, is it still possible to include that the automatic adjustment formula for petroleum products? I don't know if the question is clear. Is it possible to include that in the automatic adjustment formula for petroleum products?
There are two different things. The 17% has to do with your share in the crude that you produce. The automatic adjustment formula is how you price petroleum products, which mostly we import. So these are two very different things. And even on the crude that we produce, that is governed by a different regime, the Petroleum Revenue Management Act.
Thank you very much. And maybe I'll ask my very last question and then later invite questions from our participants here on Zoom. The last question is also in sync with what AK Mensa is asking. So it's obvious that when fuel prices increase in Ghana, to some extent, government benefits, but the ordinary Ghanaian does not. So what is the way forward now? Should government intervene? And if they should, what kind of interventions are needed from the government? And what are the likely, or what would these interventions mean to the ordinary Ghanaian in terms of bread and butter issues? Again, I start with you, Rex, because then Albert asked a question, which I think I asked earlier on. Theo talks about taxation being the lazy man's approach. What are the alternatives to taxation then? Does it matter if the money generated through taxation is put into its intended and right use? I think there's that last question bit, which perhaps is very interesting. But anyway, because of our time, we could put the two together. Should government intervene? What kind of interventions are needed, and how will the ordinary Ghanaian benefit from that?
Okay, it's always challenging for me to address some of these things because of the context I presented earlier on, in that this is the year after the onset of the COVID thing. And that if those effects that happen have actually still not yet been undone. Okay, so technically anyone who's asking for intervention is actually asking for more room to breathe, or at least enough room to breathe, so that they can get their affairs in order and get to a situation where they have reliable incomes. I think that is the ultimate. Now, intervention, yes, I think the government needs to rethink its approach to raising revenue. Initially, when some of these taxes came in, I'd said that it was a bit too early to start, putting this much pressure on people, because there's been a lot of rollback in terms of employment from the COVID situation. Prior to that, there was the pressure from the banking sector reforms, that was experienced in Ghana. So those pressures are still in the system. And, the easiest way you can see some of these things is to look at the number of young ones who are going to sign up, to immigration and all of those things. If they had jobs, they wouldn't be there. If they had something reliable that could put money in their pockets, 3,000 people will not go and line up in front of Elwak Stadium looking for a job that has already been given to someone, in quotes. So there is a certain level of intervention that government can do. And I always say that there usually is more than one scenario. Putting taxes on things seems to be the easier approach. It also looks, the government is increasingly being responsible, and that is what the international community will see. Okay, but on the other hand, we need to understand that the policymakers need to understand that the economy is made up of people, and unless they have an incentive and they can clearly see exactly what they are benefiting from, you almost always come to a chicken and egg situation. Do you put in enough taxes to get revenue and spend on the same people, or you allow the people to spend so that you can get your revenue? Okay, and in the end, that is a policymaker's dilemma. But personally, I feel that there should be some level of intervention. There will always be these subsidies and mass expenditure programs that the government wants to run, but it should actually think of key things that can help to protect the incomes of the people and to create employment. Because whether we like it or not, our politics is almost always going to be about what is going to put money in the pockets of people and what is going to put food on the table. This level where we are, in effect, that's the only thing that's going to solve this problem. So if the government intervenes now, it helps to create the impression that they listen, they are thinking about the people who make up the economy first, and not necessarily just balancing books, and trying to create an impression to the outside community that we are actually, so fiscally disciplined, we can get our books in order. That can hold, but not at the expense of people's welfare and people's lives, and you mentioned a second part to
yeah, I mean, AK was asking ways with which we could now raise revenues. You already looked at it from the long term, I would say. But there was that last part of the question that was saying, if petroleum revenues are the easy way to do it and we are putting the money in good use, would that matter?
If the money was being put to good use, yes, it would matter. The question is whether we are sure that the money is being put to good use. You see, and this is where the Auditor General reports and some of these audits come in. The history or the history of evaluation of government revenues have not been too great. Going down that road might probably take us, another hour or so to fully explain. But I believe that if the monies are going to be used well, then it makes sense to tax. But I also spoke about incentives. So I would pay a tax if I knew what it was going to be used for and I can see the value. Do you understand? For example, on the petroleum prices, you have road levies, you have sanitation and pollution levies. My question at the end of this 2021 fiscal year is, are they going to be able to show us evidence of what they've used these revenues for, right? Just the road levy and the sanitation levy, because people complain about the roads all the time. It's rainy season in Ghana and the roads keep getting worse. Yet, they're just not getting fixed as fast as they're getting destroyed. So in the end, what the revenues are used for is a key question. And if we can actually prove that they are being used for something good, I'm sure that people will want to comply. Otherwise, it goes back to the evasion and avoidance issues.
Thank you very much, Rex. Before I come to you, Dr. Tue Champot, Rex, I know you're a fan of incentivizing the citizens in order to spend. I know you usually talk about this. What do you mean by that? What can government do? I mean, break it down for us. If you say your recommendation would be government to incentivize people to spend, but what exactly are you referring to, Rex?
Okay, so technically, strictly from a macroeconomic perspective, the Keynesian approach to getting out of a recession is to give people the incentive to spend their incomes, because then the additional expenditure is what will drive more production. Do you get it? So if the incomes that people complain about are not being affected and the prices go down, right, people will have more money that they can use to spend on whatever it is that they feel will improve their welfare. Now, essentially, the way you do that is there is only the largest spender in an economy is the government. And traditionally, from a Keynesian perspective, he argued that it is government expenditure that can put these injections into the economy. We need to get to a stage where it is easier for people to make their daily bread, right, in the economy, so that they also have further incentive to spend. First of all, the easiest way to do is to take off some of the taxes and give people some breathing room. There's a large informal economy, and you won't believe it that an entrepreneur sitting somewhere in Accra has to go through a lot of trouble just to register their business and get their operations going. These are not things that are going to encourage people to want to work for the economy and generate the GDP that we are looking to generate. Right. Okay, so that's just one example.
All right.
I could talk about others, but this is just one practicality.
True. Thank you very much because of our time. So Dr. Tue Champon, what's the way to go? What kind of intervention would you propose that government take to address this issue? And how is that likely to impact on goods and services that the average Ghanaian consumes?
Yeah, I think a number of the points have already been very well articulated by Rex. The other principle is this, that there's no taxation without representation, right? Especially in our context where most times people feel like government is collecting all these taxes from them. So let no one be kids or disabuse their minds from the fact that Ghanaians don't pay taxes. People pay all forms of ad valorem type taxes or levies, left, right, center. But the point is that sometimes we also complain that we don't see the impact, right, of paying these taxes. So when your road is broken, sometimes it is not fixed. You've got issues, and specifically even within the petroleum products pricing architecture, you have road fund, you have ESLA levy, you've got bus margin, you've got all these things that are there. And the question then comes, we even at one point had TOR debt recovery levy, but we collected all those monies and still TOR is in a mess. And so it just comes back to the point where people want to see more in terms of the quality of the spending and the efficiency of the spending. And I keep hammering that point because if you cannot show me what you have used those monies for, it's going to be extremely difficult to then ask me to actually pay more for it, regardless of whether my demand is elastic or inelastic or whatever it is. At some point, the pressure will begin to kick and people will go up on the streets and there'll be social disorder. We've seen this happen in other countries. So I think at the core, or one of the core things, more maybe long term, is the overall structure of the economy, formalizing the economy, incentivizing, productive work. You have 80% of the Ghanaian economy that is still informal, and we can actually do a lot by halving, in my view, that number within probably like a decade, and create more productive employment, and people, of course, would pay more or contribute more taxes in that regard. But secondly, as they pay the tax, we need to see our government also do more to show us how they are using those monies to, stimulate those productive investment, the quality of the spending. And then third point, in relation to the quality, it's also spending that is tied to measurable outcomes. I've been involved in doing some work, and you will be shocked that most of these policy initiatives that governments come in and announce, there's actually no way of measuring or assessing or benchmarking those outcomes. So at the end of the day, we collect, say, a road fund as part of the petroleum product. And you ask yourself, to what extent has the road quality or road infrastructure improved, and thereby improve the quality of life of people, or improve, say, health outcomes, or improve education outcomes? These are bigger conversations that I think perhaps going forward, our governments need to more attention and emphasis on. But it's not just a question of collecting more money.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thierry Champon. So you have added on to what Rex has said in a way of government trying to show what they have done with the money. I guess that's what it's been referred more in the media as, if government is able to rationalize what they use these petroleum levies for, then perhaps this is also one of the ways to go. Thank you very much, Dr. Thierry Champon and Rex Esiama. So one question, no, it's not, it's actually a comment here on Zoom. I have a taxi that uses LPG, and my driver is able to disengage the cylinder for refilling at a gas station. This means it's going to be difficult differentiating domestic users from commercial transport users. Wow. So yes, so this is what has been confirmed here, what I was thinking of that. Dismantling.
People are gaming the system.
Thank you very much, George. Yes, there's an earlier question here. Anyway, okay, if you could send me the question again, if you could repost the question again. If not, then I think that the floor is open. If there is any participant here who would want to ask any question, please feel free to do so, or you can simply just type your question so that I read it out to our guest here. If not, our time is actually up.
So, Dr. Kisi?
Yes.
If I could help you with the questions?
Sure.
Okay. So there was one from George. That goes like, I think that was more of a comment when he was talking about there is a smart way to create price discrimination through a yet to be rolled out cylinder recirculation strategy, where domestic users can easily be identified from commercial transport users. Then there's a question from, I think it's a long one. It will be difficult to disentangle LPG for household cooking and LPG for vehicles. Some of the drivers buy LPG and in LPG cylinders and decant it into their vehicle cylinders. If if LPG for vehicles is priced higher than LPG for household cooking, it will lead to a surge in the practice I've stated, and it will bring about fire and explosions.
Interesting, but I guess that's also what George talks when he introduced the smart way to create this price discrimination. And like Dr. Thierry Champon said, it could be a conversation that we could have later in order to address this issue, because he made a very important point. If you look at the environmental impact of not using LPG gas, because once the prices go high, then people are forced to use charcoal and the lights that sometimes do have environmental consequences. Thank you very much, I would say. And then maybe before we end the show, I think our time is already up. And so I will just come to you, gentlemen, and ask you for your concluding remark. What would you want to pass across? And in any case, we also wanted to ask, beyond the government, I mean, we are talking about petroleum prices though, but I was just wondering, beyond the government, is there anything that civil society, other individuals can do to also help address this issue? You could add this to your concluding remark as we close the show. Start with you, Rex, again.
Okay, thanks, Evans. And I've enjoyed every bit of this conversation. You know, it's almost always practical and exciting to delve into some of these issues. I think, first of all, this isn't something that is going to last. That, you know, in time immemorial, some of these pressures come up. So eventually, there will always be a way, and some of these pressures will go away. The future, however, and something which I'm interested in going forward is how we protect the environment and look more into cleaner sources of energy. And what that means is relying less on some of these fossil fuels and moving towards a society where we have electric cars, you know, and we increasingly rely on electricity for our energy provisions. So I'd say people shouldn't worry too much about that. Eventually, you know, all of this is going to go away, and then we're going to start worrying about the prices of electricity. And that is also going to bring up its own set of, you know, issues to come up. Because in the case of Ghana, you know, we have excess capacity, and then the prices on electricity to have its own issues. So we should just do our best to manage with the situation. It will get better over time. And yeah, everything is going to be smoothened out.
Thank you very much. That's really very high mark of optimism there displayed by Rex Esiama. Dr. Tio Champo, before I allow you to conclude, there's a question here. I don't know whether you would love to answer it, from Solomon Kwesiata on Facebook. He says, my question is more for academic purpose. And to Dr. Tio, why is LPG still considered as a clean fuel, even by the International Energy Agency, when in fact it has some emission factor? Is it considered as a clean fuel, and why?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, everything is relative. If you don't use LPG, what do the households use? You're going to use charcoal, which is much more, you know, polluting than LPG. But number two, also has a much bigger environmental footprint, right? And health footprint. I talked about the environment, but the health consequences are relatively much dire in that sense of the word. So the practical approach is you have to graduate from using charcoal and the rest into using other cleaner forms of energy, of which in our case, LPG serves pretty much a very useful purpose. Clean cooking with electricity, unfortunately, in the Ghanaian context, we're not there yet. Also because the price of electricity is actually ridiculously expensive, even at the consumer end of the market, in that sense of the word. And surely, you know, although we all advocate for more renewable, you know, as part of the broader energy mix, there are other barriers or constraints that are effectively mitigating their uptake in the Ghanaian context. And we can have another conversation on that a bit more, you know, later on down the line. The two other smaller points I want to kind of highlight before we go. I think yes, the national cylinder recirculation model. I forgot about that. That is great, because then you are taking the product directly to the consumers. Nothing would still prevent the taxi driver from attempting to use their cylinder, right, and refill that. Perhaps maybe we need a little bit of thinking around that and how to reduce that. But at the core is that households use this as a key part of like their energy mix for cooking, and it has any price increment has a big impact on them. And that's why I think, in concluding, perhaps we can actually remove, if not some of the taxes on LPG going forward. But yes, there's a whole debate about the energy mix and what we need to do to increase renewable energy, uptake. The final point that I want to highlight, which is very important in this whole debate, in the energy transition debate, is that a lot of people in Africa, in Ghana, are energy poor. Our biggest problem is energy poverty and how to bridge that energy deficit or access gap. And we should use whatever resource we have at our disposal to bridge that gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tio Champon. Thank you also to Eke Mensah and Edmond Yeboah, who celebrated his birthday today. Let me wish you a happy birthday for producing the show. Thanks to those of you who joined us here on Zoom and those of you who followed us on Facebook. We would obviously upload this also on our YouTube channel. And so if you've not yet subscribed, please do so to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just type CEPSA Africa or CEPSA Talk and you would see the video. So today has been very interesting, and I'm sure the discussion would continue, particularly with the issue of LPG gas, which is something that it's been advocated more. It's something perhaps we should look at as a country if we want to prevent the environmental consequences as well as the health consequences of using the alternative, which is the charcoal. I think this is a discussion that we should have. But overall, what we have seen is that fuel prices, to a larger extent, the reason why it's very high in Ghana, it's as a result of the about 40 to 50% taxes that are put on it by the government. And it appears this is the major way with which government also gets a revenue. And so in that sense, it's a bit of a dilemma here, whether government is willing to reduce these taxes and in order to think of alternative ways of making money. It appears this is not the case in the short run. And so unfortunately, Ghanaians would have to deal with it. But like I said, it is important that government like Rex and Dr. Tio Champon have said in the long run should look at different ways of raising revenues other than through this, if you like, the lazy man's approach, which does not help all of us. In the end, it really affects the economy with people struggling. And with a funny thing that I leave you here with is that the takeaway pay or the take-home pay is not able to take people home. Thank you very much. My name is Evans Apia Kisi. Hope to see you next week as we bring you another